It's connecting to the cloud.
So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're in day 3 of our New Economy Conference, day 6 of our Wellbeing Economy Week. And I'm really pleased to now introduce Jose Ramos, who's going to talk about Cosmolocalism and the launch of a really remarkable collection of, I don't know if we call them stories or chapters, the Cosmolocal Reader. So Jose, please introduce yourself in whatever hat you'd like to be wearing today.
Thank you.
And yeah, so we've got a workshop with Jose. He'll talk for a while and then we'll have discussion. So it's all pretty relaxed, I think. So over to you, Jose.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michelle. And first, I just want to acknowledge all the work that you've done, Michelle, for the conference and you know, being the anchor for NENA for many years, and just the leadership that you've provided. So thanks to the bottom of my heart for doing all that. Also, coming from Jajarong land here in central Victoria, so acknowledging traditional owners and custodians of the land. And also, I don't like these types of acknowledgements to be just kind of empty statements. And so the best framing I've heard is that there are the older brothers and sisters, the ones that came before us, and the younger brothers and sisters, who are we. And we can learn a lot from our older brothers and sisters, Indigenous people from all over the world. So that takes humility and openness and a willingness to listen. So my own affiliation is a little mixed. I'm an adjunct lecturer at the University of Sunshine Coast. I'm a co of the Journal of Future Studies, which is funded and located out of Tamkang University in Taiwan. I run a very small boutique sort of strategy business called Action Foresight. We work with governments and NGOs and peak bodies to help envision preferred futures and design experiments for creating change. I formerly was a board member for NENA for a few years, and I've played a few different roles here and there. So yeah, so it's I'm a little bit everywhere, I guess. But that's kind of how that's how the dice rolls. So this is a passion project that we've been working on for several years. I first started to talk about cosmolocalization in 2012 when I did a stint at the National University of Singapore, and sort of began exploring these questions of, you know, how do we create change given the new dynamics of our world? And then I had a bit of an existential crisis in 2013. I started a maker lab in Footscray, and I began talking about this idea of cosmolocalization in that venue, which was, I felt a little bit like a freak at the time. But, you know, I think everyone there implicitly already understood that we had this legacy of design and legacy of knowledge around the world, and that here we were in this shared space, and we could create the future. We could create products, and we create ideas, and we could mobilize the community. And so I think this idea of, you know, cosmolocalism and design global, manufacture local is something that's been in the air with us for probably the past 10 years. And then there's various ways of talking about that. There's various sort of framings. And I just sort of began running with Cosmolocalism, and then a few other people took it up. And there were also people before, going back maybe 10 or 20 years, that were using the term cosmopolitan localism. So people like Wolfgang Sachs, the development, sort of post-development economist, and also Ezio Mazzini, the design guru out of Italy, also was using those terms. And so, yeah, so I think over the past 5 or so years, it's become, we might call it an emerging discourse for change. The idea of the reader was really to gather as many ideas and cases and examples from around the world. So it felt a little bit scattered. It felt like, there was ideas and cases and here in pockets and here and there, but there was no real place where one could look at a whole body of work, ideas and examples. So I might go into the presentation and just maybe go through some of what's in the reader, what we've gathered together. And then I think we'll take a pause and, well, maybe I'll start by just asking a question. Do you think it's better to go into the ideas on cosmolocalization first, or to go into the reader content and then do the ideas after? What do we think is better? Because I can go either way, really.
I personally like the ideas first and the examples second, just to help.
Yeah.
But that's just me. Anyone else got a preference?
Just for framing, yeah.
Penelope
Sure.
says ideas first. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. All right, ideas first and then examples after. So I'll try to be quick with the ideas because that can go on, endless, kind of blah, blah, blah. Because the examples themselves are pretty exciting. And I think that that's really what we tried to do, build a body of examples that were credible and that showed people what's being done around the world. But let's start with ideas then. Okay, so let me just find my place here. Can everyone see that? Okay, so one of the core ideas really is that we've emerged into this world of digital commons. One of the first people to articulate that was Yochai Benkler. He's currently at MIT and still doing quite a lot of interesting work. He says the salient characteristic of commons, and I think here he's sort of referring more towards digital commons, as opposed to property, is that no single person has exclusive control over the use and disposition of any particular resource in the commons. Instead, resources governed by commons may be used or disposed of by anyone among some or more less well-defined numbers of persons, under rules that may range from anything goes to quite crisply articulated formal rules that are effectively enforced. Well, that's a fairly complex idea, but it basically means that commons sit outside of a conventional property regime where one or two people control something exclusively, and can be defined more openly for a number of different categories of people to use and to support and to govern. It was Elinor Ostrom who really put commons on the table. She won the Nobel Prize in economics for showing how indigenous groups and villagers around the world were able to manage resource commons like forests and rivers that were not purely proprietary. So the kind of, most of us will come from Western conventional mindset around property relations, which really fits into this kind of binary of it's either the market and you have a person or a number of people who own it, or it's the state. And the state has power over a particular resource and it's controlled bureaucratically. And so that's kind of like the dualism that we've unconsciously or passively accepted within the Western tradition. But even in the Western tradition, going back far enough in time, there were community-based commons, resource commons, and relational commons that existed. So, and in many indigenous and peasant groups around the world. This is just the way that they live. And Michelle Bollins and I talked about commons as a combination of shared resources, which are co-produced and managed by a community of stakeholders according to their own rules and norms. So it's shared resource, which can be immaterial, community and its activity, stresses intersubjective aspects, and it requires human choice and intervention, and involves institutional and property arrangements. So the idea of cosmolocalism really is that we are moving into a world in where we have designs that don't have to sit within property relations. A community in one place in the world might be able to produce something that solves one of their problems. And then that in turn can be shared with anyone in another part of the world that can begin to solve their own problems. So this kind of, we can think of a new context for the 21st century. We have this digital commons where accessing knowledge has quote unquote zero marginal cost. That was an idea by Jeremy Rifkin, basically said in this sort of digital commons era, there is no cost to share, like a real cost, to share design. Of course, sending digits across the planet does cost a bit of money, and we've seen that with Bitcoin. But if I send an email to somebody about a design that I've created and say, hey, why don't you use this? That's not going to cost a whole lot of money. It's almost a zero marginal cost. If I put my designs on the web on a website and say, hey, here's a design for how you improve your soils in your garden, people can access that at a very low cost. So Michelle Bollins talked about that as immaterial abundance, that we've moved into a context in which we are immaterially abundant. We can share ideas for how we solve problems, for how we do things. At the same time, because of the logic of neoliberalism, neoliberalism wants to put a price on everything. Markets want to put a price on everything, and then there's patent trolls that want to lock down particular inventions and ideas and charge for that. So in the sort of context of immaterial abundance, this neoliberal economic system is very busy trying to make immaterial resources scarce. So we've got this contradiction between immaterial abundance and a system that is thinking, how do I make this scarce so I can charge for it, right? And so that's one of the critical tensions that exist in the modern era around this. We've also got a heavy ecological footprint, and we live within planetary boundaries, and we're already exceeding planetary boundaries. We're using about 1.5 Earth resources per year, and having impacts, externalities, waste, impacts in oceans. So we're in ecological deficit, and we're borrowing from future generations. So we're materially scarce. Again, the neoliberal system doesn't look at that context, and it doesn't acknowledge that we're living within, in a sense, of material scarcity and an ecological footprint that we have to live within. And then we have real poverty and the need for people to produce the things that they need and empower people with the right to redesign and reproduce the things that matter for their lives. And we're very much in an extractive political economy that drives perverse incentives and social and ecological externalities. And then we've got heavy urbanization and the rise of the city. And the city is a new force and possibly a new potential. So, just going back to that sort of logic that talked about, the idea with cosmolocalization is that you have many, we might call them myriad, in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of producer communities involved in peer production, of producing things for each other. And then as those activities get documented and made open to the world, it increases what we might call a global design pool. And these are open and globally distributed design pools and platforms. And then as those platforms mature and become robust, then they come back and they support localized production. And more communities can be involved in iterating and adapting those ideas from those, sort of global design pools back to, okay, how do we solve a problem within our community? How do we improve the soils within our local lands? How do we reduce our ecological footprint? So, that's sort of the sort of core logic around it. And if we think of, sort of bringing these things together, the Cosmo really is around universal human rights and ethics and the right to the human legacy of designs. So imagine that we are re-articulating the idea of human rights and saying, actually, people have the right to the legacy of human knowledge that has the capacity to transform our agency in shaping the local and solving problems at the local. We've got planetary governance for the protection of planetary commons, and the idea of planetary boundaries are well established, and we're working towards living within those planetary boundaries. And we're producing goods and services within those planetary boundaries. And then localization. This means people working together in cooperative enterprise, localized production, building localized circular economies, community orientation, and urban and regional mutualization of labor, resources, and value. Or as someone like my friend and colleague Andrew Ward would say, community wealth building. How do we build wealth within the community? So those are sort of some of the core ideas, and I could just go on and on. I don't want to wax too lyrical, but we might, just give us a kind of image to end this little bit. The real question with cosmolocalization is, what does mutualization mean in a planetary era? And the central idea is really that mutualization has been around for a long time. The idea of mutualization, people coming together to solve problems for each other. Here's an image of a barn raising activity somewhere in the Midwest in the United States or somewhere. And you got the entire community to come together to help one family to get their barn together. And then after you do that, well, then the community is going to help get the next barn together and the next family set up. So mutualization is a core and ancient logic within what it means to be human. And what we're talking about now is mutualization in a planetary era, that this logic is now available in this new sort of scale with all of its potentials and all of its contradictions and all of its complexities. And so this is kind of where we're at now, sort of contemplating this question. And also really fundamentally, we have so many big challenges with climate change, with poverty and building livelihoods, and with disease. And so the argument really we're putting forward here is, if we're going to solve these problems, we have to have an open knowledge sharing and mutualizing approach so that we can all accelerate the problem solving and the application of value all around the world in all these different communities as quickly as possible. We just don't have time to wait for the corporations and the governments to figure this stuff out. We're going to have to do it as communities and learn from each other in the process. So I might just stop there because I have spoken for a bit, and just see if there's any questions, and then I can go into the reader after and show some of the content in the reader.
Thanks, Jose. At the moment, I think people are just listening intently. There aren't any questions in the chat, but
Yep.
Are there any questions that people would like to raise? You're obviously welcome to unmute yourself and just speak to us. Otherwise, I'm sure Jose is very happy to go on and talk about the reader itself.
Yeah, so just keep on going then, yeah?
Yeah, and please, anyone, if you have a question as we go along, feel free to raise your hand electronically or do a performance dance with your video on. We'll see you. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm glad I asked that question because I had the reader first and ideas after. So this made a whole lot of more sense. So it's really a 2-year documentation journey, and lucky for us, it started right at the beginning of COVID. So that might have slowed a few things down. But we were persistent, and we met, and we documented, and we looked at different cases. And there were a lot of wonderful contributors. So we've gotten there in the end. It is due to come out on Wednesday, the first PDF, which will be free and shareable. And I'll send you a link later to the launch event. And people who register will get the free digital copy as soon as it comes out. We worked together. It was myself leading the project, Michelle Bowens from the Peer-to-Peer Foundation, Sharon Eade, and Gian Wang. Altogether, 12 essays and approximately 41 cases and examples. A little bit more than that, but it's hard to count them all when they're all mixed around. So just going into the essays first, the first section really is around framing, and that's because there are many different terms and language around this. People use the term design global, manufacture local. People use the term maker cities and fab cities. So really, we needed a section that helped people to understand that there are different conceptions of what this is all about, and different ways of seeing it, and different language that people use, which is a very healthy thing. We want this diversity. We don't want a single discourse to lock it all out. We want a rich space of inquiry and debate. So the first chapter really is around the genealogies of this, and that goes back to the work of Wolfgang Sachs and Ezio Manzini, but also the cosmopolitan ideas of Immanuel Kant and the more recent cosmopolitan sort of philosophies. There's a chapter on Do It Together, Toward Factories of the Future. It was a particular school around this, or way of thinking around this, by Laurent Dupont, Fedora Cosme, Joshua Pierce, and Roland Ort. There's another important chapter on Evolving Systems for Generative Justice, Decolonial Approaches to the Cosmolocal. Really important way to articulate human rights in the context of what we're talking about, in the context of design. And very, very fascinating and important article that talks about how we've been alienated ecologically, alienated from work and labor. And so really talks about both, this right to design and generative justice as an approach to healing alienation. And an article that's co-written by Michelle and myself called The Pulsation of the Commons really tries to frame cosmolocalism within a long-term historical context over the history of capitalism, but also within geological time, situating it within sort of the Anthropocene and pre-Anthropocene, Holocene, and deeper geological time. There's a section on building ecosystems, ecosystems really and cosmolocalism are sort of twined, because anytime we're trying to create a value exchanging system, a virtuous cycle, that includes a sort of ecosystem questions. Sharon Eade takes this on with the circular economy and really makes an argument for community-based circular economies. I talk about a protocol commons, which is a meta language for people doing many different activities, commoning activities to be able to communicate and exchange value and coordinate. Tomas Diaz, he's the leader of the Fab City movement, really remarkable movement to make whole cities sort of auto-productive and within ecological planetary boundaries. So really in the context of urban planetary boundaries, how do we create circular economies and auto-productive cities? And he's got a Fab City challenge that really challenges cities to do this. Andrew Ward's written an essay on financing cosmolocalism. This is really one of the Rosetta Stones around this. How do we scale these enterprises within the context of neoliberalism that only wants to reward kind of venture capital, high revenue returning enterprises? How do we have a community orientation towards financing? It's really quite a useful and practical, but also wise and intelligent essay. And finally, there's an example from Colombia, Cosmolocalism, a tool for social appropriation of knowledge and rural development, by Wilmar Ricardo Rugeles Joya, and really talks about the what does it take? What are the ingredients it takes to do this in a rural setting? And that has 3 cases attached to it. So they've already made some pretty significant sort of impacts in that context, and he goes into that. And here's a picture of the Fab City, one of the Fab City events in Barcelona. And then the final section is really around challenging cosmolocalism. Cosmolocalism, shouldn't just be accepted as a kind of, universalizing discourse. It's a moment in time. It's a way of addressing challenges, but there should be openness and reflexivity to critique. And so Michael McCallum challenges cosmolocalism as really, sitting too closely within the modernist Western concepts of a state and market power. So he really says cosmolocalism has to move outside to be a world that in which many worlds can coexist, to put it in the terms of Arturo Escobar. And then Helena Norbert Hodge, Alex Jensen, Stephen Gorelick, and Henry Coleman really challenged cosmolocalization on a different number of fronts, on being too closely aligned to technological solutionism, because it is very much, it has been sort of riding the sort of technological discourse. So very, very useful contribution there. And then Paul Waldman writes an article on the Australian bush mechanic as a different discourse to think about what this all means. So those are the essays, really rich ideas and provocations, and really helps to give sort of new context and meaning, and also I think the reader is repositioning cosmolocalism out of that techno-solutionist tradition and more into what does it mean to create the world and to have a world that has space for many worlds. And so I actually think the repositioning is really, really healthy. So I'm quite happy about how the articles came together and the different conceptions there. In terms of cases and examples, we have for over 40. So hard to go into detail on all of them, but I'm going to give a whistle-stop tour and hopefully whet your appetite for having a look at the reader itself. So we have a section on stories, starting off with a brilliant example from India, Let There Be Light, ITT Bombay's sole project to energize rural India. And that one basically used open hardware and open software for rural development projects in India to bring solar power to villages around the Maharashtra region. There's another article situated in China by David Lee, Rural Dynamism and Digital Age, how towns in China are using open fabrication approaches for economic development. There's a great article by Joshua Pierce, Open Source Preemptive Strike and the Coming War Over the Freedom to Make Your Own Products. Talks about how patent trolls are trying to lock down the 3D printing space and his efforts in designing different algorithms to make this open design space possible. Article on Utopia Maker is a global community that does open source prosthetics for people with disabilities. And then there's a really great overview by Chris Bennett on open farming in the United States and how farmers are basically hacking tractors and different systems to make farming open and shareable in the context of companies like John Deere that are essentially trying to lock farmers out of their own machinery. And then another article from China, Vicky Xie, David Lee, Kangkang Zhang, on the 3D printing revolution in Chang'an. Explorations, we have, now I'm just going to go a little bit quicker, an amazing article on community wind power and pico hydro, meaning small scale hydro, really phenomenal contribution. Farm Hack, which is an open farming instrument prototyping community in the northeastern United States by Chris Giotitsas. And also L'Atelier Paysans, which is a French-based cooperative where people are doing open design. And we got a couple of photos there. There's a photo of Farm Hack and farmers sort of coming together to do farm prototypes. And there's L'Atelier Paysan, building machines. And it's mainly for farmers that are doing organic farming where mainstream equipment isn't really being produced. So they have to kind of produce things themselves. Open Bionics, another community doing prosthetics. Sensorica, they do medical equipment. Zoomakers does rural agricultural tools, and MuCSM is an accounting software for material energy flows that fits into the idea of how do you produce within planetary ecological boundaries. FabChain, another system for tracking urban metabolisms in production and manufacturing. Faircoin and Faircoop, more experiments in developing open cooperative systems. Envieta is a platform for open production. Holochain, which you've probably heard about 1,000 times. And Ability Made, which is a Sydney-based enterprise to create prosthetics for children with disabilities. And here's a couple of pictures from Ability Made. They weren't formerly known as Ability Mates, but they've changed their name. And then we have Q&As. So, I did some email Q&As with a few people. So there's one on Beehive Cooperative by Ian McBurney. There's one on open motors, which is automotive manufacturing enterprise by Yuki Liu. And there's Wiki Factory, which is a platform for product design by Carolina, Portugal. And here's some pictures of open motors, some of their vehicles and platforms. And then snapshots. So, you know, we got quite a lot of long-ish cases and examples, but we also wanted to grab a number of others. And these ones are fairly small, anywhere from 1 to 3 pages. Afropedia, the Cosmolocalism project, which is quite significant. It's a multi-million-dollar, multi-year project funded by the European Union, which aims to test some of the principles and ideas around Cosmolocalism. So that's written up by the project leader, FarmBot, Field Ready, which is disaster response. They're doing incredible work in the space of open design. They go into disaster areas, and instead of relying on these massive supply chains, which are really inefficient and slow, they go in with auto-productive technologies and begin producing the things that people need on the spot. It's phenomenal work. GLIA is kind of Palestinian, Canadian medical equipment enterprise. Hexayurt produces hexagonal yurts. Lika Restaurant, Multifactory, which is a kind of network of factories. Open source COVID-19 medical supplies, which there was a significant movement during COVID around that. Open source ecology, one of the oldest sort of enterprises in the space. The open source ecology micro house creates kind of tiny houses that are open design. Open Desk, they do furniture. Open Food Network, which is the Australian-based platform and network for food distribution. Open Insulin, an Oakland, California-based project to produce insulin, because the price of insulin in the United States is ridiculous, and it's, again, sort of controlled by very large pharmaceuticals that are unaccountable to any kind of social ethics. So people are literally biohacking their own insulin so that they can survive. Precious Plastic, which is an open source, open design project that allows people to create machines that can upcycle plastic, take old plastics and turn them into things that are useful. RepRap is one of the original open 3D printing platforms that allows you to 3D print your own 3D printer. And WikiHouse, which is a very well-known enterprise and community that's started in the UK, but now around the different parts of the world, where people can produce their design and produce houses. So here are a couple of photos. There's a FarmBot modified CNC machine doing some farming. There's a picture of a WikiHouse coming up. Precious Plastic from a container, and some of their machines. Yeah. So yeah, there's the Whistle Stop tour. And so yeah, I mean, I think you can either break into pairs and just talk, have a chance in a pair to kind of find out, well, what are my questions around this space, and then come back with questions, or we could just go straight into kind of Q&A. So Michelle, it's over back to you.
Well, thank you, Jose. That has just blown me away. Such an amazing amount of really exciting examples, actually. And they've actually got a comment here from another Michelle. It's not me. Massive body of work. Well done pulling it all together from such rich and diverse sources. Michelle's asked, did you share the link for the launch already? And I don't think
I haven't. So
I'll pop in a minute. Yeah.
I'll bring it up and I'll get it going. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if people would like to just write in the chat, would you like a chance to break out and discuss, or are you happy to stay in this group? So maybe just write in the chat. I'll give you a minute or 30 seconds. Just write group if you're happy to stay here. Put chat if you go into a smaller group.
But I can't.
Happy here, staying in the group. Happy group.
I think everyone says group, yeah.
Group. All right. And we are a small group, so we can stay together.
Yeah, we're intimate. We're on online group hugs.
Yay! God, I need one. Sorry, I haven't actually been so busy this morning. I haven't had time for a coffee, so I'm starting to go, whoa.
I know.
One question I'd like to start with, Jose, and that might actually get a bit of discussion going is, given this range of wonderful examples, and given what NENA is all about, what kinds of aspects of this reader do you think NENA should pick up on first, or engage with, or explore? Or what do you think a network that's trying to bring stories together, other than promote the whole lot, what do you think is particularly relevant for a growing national network in the Cosmolocalisation space?
Yeah. Well, I think probably socializing the ideas is first. And obviously shared language. We have to start with shared language. I think probably NENA's, well advanced as a community in that. So probably, and then I'd say, I'd say like everything is contextual to the needs. So there's examples from different places, and I think maybe there's different themes. There's agriculture, and there's recycling and upcycling, circular economy, prosthetics. Thinking maybe it could be around looking at what are the needs and the opportunities where someone has interest and is willing to put in some effort to looking at where this might land. But I think, boy, it's a really good question. I don't have a ready, obviously.
No,
but
you're just launching the book. You haven't quite thought about how to implement all of those ideas. I understand.
Yeah. It's, but I mean, the critical question. So one, I would say just to kind of finish on almost like a conundrum, or not a conundrum, but like one of the key learnings and challenges is, I think as sort of, techno solutionists, we came in with this assumption, not all of us, but some of us, that we've got this design commons, and, now we have all these potentials, and it should be easy for communities to, just go out and recreate their world, right? And I think the action research learning out of this has been, no, actually the local is as important, maybe more important than the global, because nothing can happen without really connected communities that are thinking about how they can solve their own problems and live within ecological boundaries and create livelihoods. And so, that kind of full circle, I think we've taken that journey. And I think maybe I would leave that question to that, like, how do we actually generate local activities and that are generative, that return value for us, and which are generative in many senses, like emotionally generative. It's so great to be part of these projects with my fellow community members and citizens. So emotionally generative, spiritually generative, this is meaningful. But also in Andrew Ward's sense, financially generative. Well, we did this project, and look, we've saved ourselves all this money, or we can sell this product and it's not coming from China, and also ecologically generative. So I really think it's about how do we land this at a local level that's generative on these on you know, across the chakra, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's for me. And of course the big design pools and stuff, you know, I think they'll develop, but I feel like people, especially after COVID and being locked up and away from each other, we need to connect with each other, and we need to have those group hugs and find that emotional, spiritual, but also financial, ecological, virtuous cycles, you know. So that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
Thanks, Jose. I'll just read these comments out from Michelle, and you can pick up on whichever bits we haven't already touched on. She says, yes, I'm curious about the obvious opportunities you see in this, Jose. Where can we start to rewrite the economy, and which ideas or threads have near-term, perhaps she means immediate, economic impacts? So that's one comment. And then Penelope has mentioned, how are some of these initiatives funded? Do they create a livelihood for people? So maybe you can pick on which ones of these have got like near-term or immediate economic impacts?
Well, really it's case by case. You know, you have to look at the different examples. Some of them are gonna, like, if a farmer solves a particular problem on their farm in terms of you know, a piece of equipment that they needed that wasn't on the market, the community came together and co-designed it, that's a pretty immediate impact. So I'd say some of these examples are pretty big. You can buy a farm bot and begin modifying it pretty much straight away, you know, and be part of that open source community. And if you start you know, you don't need a robot to start farming, you know. We have hands, you know. So there's a techno solutionism in there that I think is useful to critique. But at the same time, you can just start. You can start with a hexayurt in your backyard, because that's an open. So okay, instead of a shed, you know, I'm gonna create a hexayurt. You know, and I think it was Vinay Gupta who started that community, and there you go. You know, you've already started fabricating something, and you can start using recycled products for doing that hexayurt. You can start using, or you can do it as a community. So you can start barn raising. Instead of barn raising, you could do a hexayurt raising. So I think there's a lot of those opportunities that exist. A lot of it has to do with culture. You know, we're so used to going out when we need something and buying it. I'm just as guilty of this as everyone else. And I think culturally we have to retrain ourselves to go, how can I do this myself? How can I do it with other people in my community? Rather than just go to, you know, just, you know, jump in the SUV to IKEA, right? So I think it's a big cultural element. You know, we're coming from a culture of consumerism to we're trying to create a new culture, essentially. That's what Cosmolocalism is, you know, trying to create a new culture. So some of these other things are going to take much longer time frame. Obviously, if you look at the case by Ability Made, they got to deal with all kinds of regulation around prosthetics. They got to work with orthosists. They have to work with all these different specialists. Years and years and years and years of prototyping and work. And, you know, I have pure admiration for you know, Melissa and Johan and their team, because they've stuck with it and are doing such amazing work. But you know, obviously that space is a highly regulated space, specialized space, and it's gonna be harder to make those kind of quick wins. So, you know, strap in for the 5 to 10 year journey. But hey, if you need prosthetics, they might be able to help you. So, you know, if you're driving it, it's one thing. If you're adopting, it's another thing. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for adoption in the short term. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jose. Penelope has asked, I've already mentioned it, but how are some of these initiatives funded? Do they create livelihoods for people?
Yeah, so lots of different models. And that's one of the interesting things here is that, you know, sitting in this sort of liminal space between the market, the commons, you know, and even the state sometimes, creates all these different combinations, all these different hybridities. We stopped short of analyzing them and saying, okay, this is what they look like. We wanted to bring the body together that allowed people to then look at that body and then begin to develop their own analysis. So we expect analysis to come out of this. And in the way we're trying to frame this is the opening. You know, there's been a lot of development. We've brought some things together. Now there's going to be the chance to make sense of it. So I think there's no like ready-made answer to that. But for example, so I said there's many models. I'll go into some of those ideas. L'Atelier Paysans in France is a cooperative, and it's a cooperative that's partly funded by the state. So, you know, it really is built on kind of subsidiarity principles. Okay, this is helping farmers all over France. And the farmers get a lot from it because they're, you know, can access open designs and build the tools they need for their farming. And the state can, you know, at some level can see the value of that. So they're getting membership money from farmers all over France. They're also getting some state funding. Farm Hack in northeastern United States is an association. They have I think they've struggled a little bit more financially, but you know, so I think members pay a certain amount to be part of the association, and then they come together at different events to help each other. Some of them are full-fledged enterprises, like, and some of them are just businesses, but the businesses give in a sense, a non-extractive return to the platform members. OpenDesk in the UK produces designs for furniture that can be routed by CNCs, and they're only produced by local people. So if you put in a request for OpenDesk, it'll go to your local fabricators, and your local fabricators will give you a quote. I did this when I lived in Footscray. I got a quote from a place in Kensington, another one from a place in Sunshine, and they told me, yeah, this is how much it's probably going to cost. So that's an enterprise, but it's non-extractive. They take a cut, you know, like less than 10%. Most of the funds will go back to the designers and the fabricators that are actually doing the work. So that's a different one.
Thanks, Jose.
I could go on and on. Like, there's just a lot of diversity there. Yeah.
There's a few more questions. We've got about 5 minutes left, so it's up to you how long you answer each one.
No worries. Yeah, I'll make them quick.
Yeah, I've got one here from somebody in the room at QT Koala Room. Jose, it seems that Cosmolocalisation is mainly about making physical or digital items. A critical area of the commons is property relations, as you mentioned, you know, Ostrom. I know P2P has dealt with this issue. Is there any place in Cosmolocalisation for sharing innovations in housing and property commons?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And what we've tried to do is reframe Cosmolocalism from a techno-solutionist orientation to a broader post-development approach, to approach towards commoning and mutualization. There's no way we can have, so one of the principles of Cosmolocalisation is equipotentiality, meaning supporting the potentials of all people. And that cannot happen without property relations that are more equal. We know how skewed our, you know, global speculative financial systems have driven the property market and made them exclusive and locked so many people out. So Cosmolocalism is not the answer to property relations, because I think, you know, the more that the more that you try to make Cosmolocalism the answer, the less useful it is. I think it needs to be seen as one strategy of an ecology of strategies. And I would say commoning principles in the area of property relations, the work that Prosper's doing around land tax and around challenging speculative capital in property is fully super important. And so what I would say is that Cosmolocalism has to sit arm in arm with those other strategies, so that you can have the potential for people to be creative. And one of the things I learned in Berlin is people actually have time to do things. And that the reason they have time to do things is because they regulate their rents vigorously. And they've been around long enough to know that if you don't do that, then all people are going to be doing is working to pay, to pay the rent. So, or, pay for inflated property prices. So it's more of an arm in arm thing, I think, with those types of challenges, rather
Jose.
than does Cosmolocalism solve that particular issue? Yeah.
Jose, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just referring mainly to sharing the stories, because just what you mentioned about Berlin, just the idea of rent control and all of these different innovations, just in terms of reader, sharing some of these stories globally might be useful for people that are trying to implement these ideas. That's what I meant in terms of sharing the ideas in say a future reader, because I didn't see anything about property in your reader. That's all.
Yeah. We wanted to address it, and when I shared it with Carl Fitzgerald, he said, Jose, you've missed this, And I told him, you're right, and we just can't tackle everything, but tell me what I should say. So we got something in the introduction on that, and also Sharon Eads' paper on property, on the circular economy, tackles property straight on and brings in some of the ideas from Prosper Australia to address property relations. However, look, this is an opening, this is not your definitive, this is the starting point. And so my invitation to you would be, write that paper on cosmolocalism and property. That's your paper to write, and let's explore that.
Should not have opened my big mouth, huh?
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, you volunteered for a paper for the next
Mutualism. I do that too.
Thanks for the invitation.
I was going to say, I do that too, Jose. When people say what NENA should be doing, I say, wonderful. How can you help us do that? We've got time for one last question, I think, from Kevin Cox. He has asked, can we take existing enterprises and reshape them to fit the model? I'm thinking of current government privatization of government business. Is there an opportunity to create the commons? I'm thinking of aged care in the home in particular.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, anything that's been created is baked in culturally, politically, and economically in so many different ways. So any redesign effort is always going to be a little challenging, but we can certainly imagine it. We can certainly design it. And there's opportunities for people to tweak their businesses or the enterprises or the communities in ways where you can begin leveraging this. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. It's just about applying a kind of imagination and design lens to those issues. Yeah.
Well, I guess, can I just add to that?
Sure.
If there's anyone interested in fixing up aged care, could they contact me? It turns out that when you go to get aged care as an old person, it costs you more to use the government subsidy than it does to do it yourself. So, so if anyone's interested in this, please contact me.
Kevin, send me an email. I actually have a couple of contacts who are looking at different models for aged care, so let me know as well. So now, Jose, there's a couple last questions, but I think we need to break because we've only got half an hour for lunch.
Sure.
The overwhelming loveliness of all the proposals, but would you like to put a contact in there? I've your link for the launch event, but if you've got an email you're happy to share, if other folks have other questions.
Yeah, sure. I'll put my email in.
Yeah.
And I'll share the link one last time.
Thanks, Jose. And while you do that, I'll just start to wrap up. So really thankful to you, Jose, for making the time to share and to talk about your wonderful collection of stories. We'll be promoting it on the NENA website after the launch. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you everybody for sharing time with us in this session. Just a reminder that we're going to go into a break now and then we kick off again with a whole range of another 4 parallel sessions, and stick around until the very end when myself, a few other folks in Strategic Directions Group, and Eleanor Glenn will give a bit of a wrap up and what's NENA up to next and how can you all share your amazing input. So thank you again, Jose, and thank you to everyone in the Koala Forest room at QUT. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Still recording.